Now we've got legendary reporter and author of the new book, War, Bob Woodward. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
So you open the book by recounting an interview that you held with Trump 35 years earlier, during which one of his defining characteristics was on full display, and that was to never fold. In your initial example that you gave in the book, Trump didn't fold when he was faced with inspectors as a real estate mogul, and of course, more recently, he didn't fold when he lost the 2020 election, going so far as to incite an insurrection. Knowing what we know about him, how certain is it that if he loses in November, it's simply an inevitability that he again refuses to fold?
Well, I mean, President Biden has said in an interview that Biden does not believe there will be a peaceful transfer of power. It's the sitting president saying we don't have a system that will ensure that peaceful transfer. Well, he's right because of Trump.
Trump knows he's lying with regard to the stolen election claims, but again, it's his nature to never admit defeat, to never fold. But you recount something in the book that struck me as delusional even by his standards. He called Alabama lawmaker Mo Brooks in the middle of Biden's presidency to publicly call for a special election to reinstate him, Donald Trump, as president. So is that Trump taking everybody for fools because he's just that confident that they'll do his bidding no matter how ridiculous that bidding is? Or is that Trump high on his own supply and thinking that he will actually be reinstated in, I believe it was August 2021, in accordance with the then believed QAnon conspiracy theories?
Well, his good friend, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, supporter, but Lindsey Graham is someone, like I quote him in this book, saying that Trump is increasingly erratic. And there's a point when Lindsey Graham talks to Trump and said, now look, you've got the people who think we didn't go to the moon, people who think the earth is flat, and he's focusing in on Trump's claim that, this year, saying he won in 2020, but there's no evidence to support that. And there are a couple of scenes in the book where Trump calls Lindsey Graham and said, see, I only brought up 2020 twice now. So he seems to know that this is a bit of a charade.
And we have evidence of that we know from the January 6th committee where, we had this parade of Trump officials, including his own daughter and his own attorney general, Bill Barr, who came forward and said that these claims of fraud were bullshit. And still he didn't care. And he was revealed as telling his acting deputy attorney general, just say there was fraud and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. So to your exact point, the extent to which this was a charade and he knew it was put on full display.
It was.
Now, Trump often fearmongers about World War III, and my political biases aside, what I truly believe is that he's just doing demagoguery and painting a picture of a dystopian agenda in order to scare people into voting for him. Like, even if the whole world woke up tomorrow and joined hands and sang, "We are the world," Donald Trump would still be frothing at the mouth and fearmongering about the imminent prospect of World War III. But from your vantage, is this an instance where he's like a broken clock and inadvertently correct that we may be teetering perilously close to World War III? Or do you think that this period of conflict is not too dissimilar from any other period of conflict that we found ourselves in over the last several decades?
No. This is very serious, and I quote the CIA director, Bill Burns, saying that all the warnings are blinking red. Take this much seriously, more seriously even, because what's going on in the war where Russia has invaded Ukraine is started in 2022, and so it seems it's off the screen now, but it's a major war in which hundreds of thousands of people have been wounded or killed. It is an effort by Putin to engage in what Hitler did in the 1930s, territorial assault, taking over another country.
I do want to dig into Russia, but first just a quick question on Benjamin Netanyahu. So you quote Biden in the book as calling Netanyahu A son of a bitch, one of the biggest fucking assholes in the world, a bad fucking guy, and a fucking liar. So, not exactly subtle there. And yet, as we all know, Biden's effectively refused to use any leverage against Netanyahu as Netanyahu continues to escalate the war. So, how do you square that circle where clearly Biden has resentment for Netanyahu, I mean, based on those quotes themselves, and yet he further empowers him through his unwillingness to step up to him?
Well, the policy that Biden has is we support Israel, but not necessarily Netanyahu. If I may quote some of those, what Biden says in private about Netanyahu, and it even goes to the point not only where Biden will say to a close associate in the White House that SOB, maybe not Netanyahu's, he's a bad guy, even goes to saying, why isn't there an internal revolt in Israel, a strong internal revolt about just voting Bibi out? How come they don't want to get him out there? And then he says more things about how he personally disparages Netanyahu. And at one point, Biden says to Netanyahu, you know, the perception of Israel around the world increasingly is that you are a rogue state, a rogue actor.
You write extensively about how Putin's rationale for the invasion into Ukraine was a return of what he calls the Cradle of Russia. That's what he called Ukraine. And about how the brightest of red lines for him was Ukrainian admission into NATO. That's what he was trying to prevent. To what extent do you think that Putin's embrace of Donald Trump is in service of his ability to manipulate Trump, specifically in order to undermine NATO?
First of all, Ukraine did not get admitted to NATO. There is a big debate about that. And what Ukraine has done under President Zelensky very bravely resisted this invasion by Russia. And it's the biggest war going on in the world, and the consequences could be immense if there is some success on this. I mean, just look at the geography of the world. If Russia takes Ukraine, Ukraine has a 315-mile border with Poland. I talked to President Duda of Poland, and he's horrified at the prospect. We will be next. I just wanted to make this point that the CIA Director Burns has said this is an intelligence assessment based on information they gather inside Russia that Putin manipulates. He's professionally trained to do that. In fact, Putin has a plan to play Trump still, not just when he was in office, but now.
When you hear something like that, and then you look at the debate with Kamala, where she came in with a clear plan to bait him, and of course he fell for it hook, line, and sinker. So seeing how easy it was for Kamala Harris to successfully bait Trump, despite Trump knowing how high the stakes were, and also how many people were watching. I think we had 60 to 70 million people watching, and yet still he fell for it. What does that say about how successful Vladimir Putin would be, knowing what you know about that guy, when it's just a one-on-one scenario and they're behind closed doors?
Okay, first of all, Trump's ego. I have done 3 books on him. I spent a whole year, last year of his presidency, talking to him. Trump's ego is dangerous. And the problem is he does not have a plan on what to do as president, and he doesn't have a team that works with him. He's a one-man operation. Quite frankly, he'll have a hanger-on, and then those people will be discarded or fall into disfavor. So it's a perilous time for the world, to say the least.
You wrote a book focused largely on Trump, on Putin, on Netanyahu, and all these guys share similar qualities. They're ambitious, they're egotistical, they're insecure, and they view themselves as above the law. What was your takeaway about the danger of figures like this in positions of power leading the world?
Well, which one particularly are you
Well, I
interested
think the
in?
fact that we have figures like this leading at the same time, all in a position of power, being able to work together, basically.
Well, there's no working together. I mean, the problem is you have heads of so many of these countries looking at only their own interest. Now, that's their job, but you have to have some sort of international system. Vice President Harris has talked about this axis of upheaval, these group of countries that all they're interested in is trouble and aggression.
You wrote about how Donald Trump had secretly sent COVID testing machines to Putin, and that was a point that was previously unreported. Of course, there's something to be said for the fact that this book was released before the election, and so therefore we all know about it. But in any case, this is still pertinent information that was held until the book was published, that at a bare minimum should be necessary for Americans to know about ahead of an election where the perpetrator of that action is right now on the ballot. To what extent do you feel that reporters have an obligation not to sit on pertinent information versus the opposite view, that you're the one who gathered that info and that no one else is necessarily entitled to it?
Yes, but I sat on nothing. You don't get these things. You get them incrementally where you can confirm them and actually establish that. You know, it's just a simple reality that reporting doesn't happen in real time. Uh, I learned this year things that happened in 2021. So if they're in the book, people about occurrences in 2021, I didn't learn about it then. Um, I mean, this is the natural process of reporting. I make it very clear to sources that if there's something I learn that the public needs to know about immediately, I will go to the Washington Post. I've done that. The business about the COVID machines uh, is important news, but it was old. And by publishing at this time, two things happened. Trump denied it, and it's very fascinating. The Kremlin issued a statement saying that it was accurate. I have to put the Kremlin on speed dial, check in with them. Anyway, it's out there, and not only is it confirmed by the Kremlin, but the impact that it's the portrait of Trump that emerges that Trump has this secret alliance with Putin, where he's more interested in what he can do for Putin rather than people of our own country now. And the process of verifying this takes months.
You and Carl Bernstein did much of the reporting on Watergate. As you sit here today in the wake of the January 6th insurrection, how does it make you think about what happened in 1972?
In what way?
Obviously, Watergate was cataclysmic. It led to the end of a presidency, a president resigning, and yet now it feels kind of quaint in comparison.
Well, quaint. I mean, it was serious. It was massive law breaking. President Nixon got caught, and he resigned and paid the price. Uh, in this case, these are, maybe there are legal violations involved in all of this, but what what I can do is explain Putin and hopefully explain the policy of President Biden and what President Biden did, which is very important. He did not send American troops to fight in the war in Ukraine. We billions of dollars of assistance, but Biden said no Vietnam. We are not going to send American troops, and that has allowed him, as I point out, which we all know, to make the homeland safe. We have a safe homeland. And if we were involved in some war with hundreds of thousands of our troops, or even a few engaged abroad, we would lose that comfort and that feeling of we've defended our interests, but not got ourselves involved in a foreign war.
Nixon wasn't able to survive Watergate, and yet now, despite committing crimes exponentially worse, Trump has not only not been excommunicated from his party, he is again the Republican nominee for President of the United States. What's the most responsible example or rationale you can think of that kind of explains that shift from 1972 to 2024?
Boy, that's going to be for the psychiatrists and the historians. What I can say is let's look at who Trump is and what the prospect of him as president. Because I knew when he was president in 2020 and the coronavirus crisis, which he totally mishandled, hundreds of thousands of people have died. If he had just communicated the warning. In this case, let's look, what does Trump not have? He has no plan. His operation is, oh, I'll say this, I'll do that, this moment. Inconsistent. I mean, just the other day, he was blaming President Zelensky of Ukraine for the invasion. He's not the one that invaded. The other element that's missing in Trump world is a team of people who work together. Look at Biden. Biden has got a CIA director, a national security advisor, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, his longtime aide, and they all work together to achieve the purpose. And the purpose here is not getting us involved in a foreign war, at the same time protecting the homeland. It's not a bad record. This is not a political judgment by me. It is a judgment about the substance.
You obviously have a long, storied career in the press. To what extent do you think that the media landscape today has lent itself to, whereas Nixon had to resign because he didn't have the Fox Newses of the world backing him, now there's a right-wing media apparatus that exists to act as a propaganda arm of the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, that's a factor in all of this. I don't think it's determinative. And I think in the media, we can do lots of important self-examination. Sometimes we're in too much of a hurry, and the daily story, the daily grind of there's this little element, that little element, and we're taking more time really digging into explaining. You look at this book, you have the opportunity to see who Donald Trump is. He's all through the book attempting to conduct this shadow presidency and running for office again. You can see who Biden is. And that's the landscape American citizens and voters are dealing with.
Let's finish off with this. Your last 4 books are Fear, Rage, Peril, and now War. So there's obviously a clear progression, a clear trajectory. What do you hope your 5th book will be titled, and what do you think your 5th book will be titled?
I have no idea about another book. I'm trying to, it was difficult working on this one, as you recall, this summer. Things kept changing, who the candidates were. I was able to, this book goes up to the middle of August, so you can see the changes, the emergence. First of all, Biden's decision to drop out and why, and there's important new information on that, and the rise of Harris, and then this Trump candidacy, whatever you see supporters like Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, saying that Trump is increasingly erratic. Erratic. That's from one of his biggest supporters.
Well, that book, again, for those watching and listening right now, is War. It was an excellent read. You will devour this book, and I promise you will walk away much smarter than when you first opened it. It gives a very clear-eyed and holistic, inside-the-room view of what happened as it relates to Russia and Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and even Donald Trump and his emergence back onto the scene after January 6th. So, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Of course, thank you. Good luck.